All right. I'm going to call the March 18th joint working session between the Board of Ed and the Town Council together. Mrs. Senator, can we have a roll call, please?
Board Member Armstrong. Councilor Balboni.
Present.
Board Member Caldwell.
Here.
Councilor Cordero.
Here.
Chair Corsi.
Here.
Councilor Delnicki.
Here.
Councilor Fitzgerald. Councilor King.
Here.
Secretary Manili.
Here.
Board Member Marks.
Here.
Board Member Nettles.
Here.
Councilor Olet. Deputy Mayor Paterna.
Here.
Councilor Pendleton.
Present.
Board Member Shaw.
Here.
Board Member Yanaway.
Here.
Mayor Zimmerman.
Here. Thank you. Okay, item 3 is public comment. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak to us at this time? Okay, seeing none, we're up to item 4, which is items for discussion, the Board of Ed proposed budget for fiscal year 26-27. I did have a couple of comments before we get going, and then we'll go right to people's questions. I wanted to welcome the Board of Education, Dr. Carter, and her administrative staff, and the members of the public here tonight to our annual joint budget meeting. While this is going to be a very difficult budget year.
Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
Point of order. Would you mind if we said the Pledge of Allegiance before we got started?
Okay, we don't normally do that in work sessions, but it's a challenging request from the Board of Ed and the town, and many of our taxpayers facing rising costs for insurance, food, utilities, and other necessary purchases. For your information, if the town council were to fully fund all the current budget requests and use $3 million from the tax stabilization fund, the new tax rate would be 6.97%. For every 1% reduction in tax rate, we would have to have a combination of $1.35 million in spending decreases and revenue increases. With this background information, hopefully we can have a respectful and productive discussion tonight with our fellow town leaders on the board. Before we start discussing the Board of Ed's proposed budget for 26-27, the Town Council would like to make a presentation to Dr. Carter and the Board of Ed. In January, Deputy Mayor Paterna and I had the opportunity to attend a dinner at the state capitol celebrating the Republic of India Day and Diwali. As you all know, South Windsor is the fastest growing school district in the state, in large part due to our increasing South Asian population. I'm very proud to have been part of the Board of Ed when we in 2022 added Diwali as an official holiday for our school system, the first school district in Connecticut to do so. This increase in diversity and the new culture has improved and strengthened our entire community. At this time, Deputy Mayor Paterna is going to present a gift we received for our leadership on Diwali to Dr. Carter, since the school system and not the mayor deserves this recognition. And I don't know, I'm just asking at this time if the Board of Ed Chair, Mrs. Corsi, the Superintendent, Dr. Carter, or our Town Manager, Mr. Maniscalco, has anything that they would like to comment on before we ask for questions. Dr. Carter? No?
I just had a non-budget related shout out that I'd like to give to one of our residents. As you may be aware, I have taught at Central Connecticut State University for over a decade, preparing aspiring superintendents for their 093 certification, which is the certification required to be a superintendent in the state of Connecticut. In fact, there are over 20 sitting superintendents in Connecticut who were my CCSU students, which makes me feel both proud and old. I am particularly proud that one of my former students, Dr. Noha Abdelhadi, was named the superintendent of Windsor Public Schools last night. I share this because Noha is a South Windsor resident and did her year-long internship with me in South Windsor. We should all be proud of our neighbor and friend who is an exceptional educational leader doing great work for the children and families of Windsor. Naha, if you're watching, congratulations.
Okay, so at this time, we'll open it up. If anybody has any questions about the Board of Ed budget, Dr. Carter's here, Mrs. Chimerko, the rest of the administrative staff, who I know will be able to answer our questions tonight. So I do have a few, but does anybody have anything? All right, well, I'll ask a couple, and then if you guys can help me if you see any lights. So, Dr. Carter, I have a couple questions that people have been coming to council meetings talking about the board budget. They probably, should be coming here, but so let me just ask you a couple. Without knowing the needs of the specific children or the number of open seats in each grade at a particular school, would 100 more or less students next year have any specific change in your budget? Said another way, does a 5% increase in students mean your expenditures should only go up 5%? Are they directly tied to each other?
No. The correlation between your percentage increase in students and your percentage increase monetarily would not correlate directly. And I think it's important to understand that when people are looking at each year's enrollment growth and then looking at the budget that's being proposed, it's the cumulative effect of our enrollment, which has been steadily increasing over a 10-year period. We're the only district in the state that has 10 consecutive years of enrollment increases. And so really what we're feeling now is the cumulative effect of those needs sort of tipping and hitting the mark of when you need to add teachers. So for example, at our elementary level, you won't see a request for an elementary teacher in this budget because we have plateaued in our elementary population. But yet you will see asks for the middle school and certainly the high school, who are expected to be getting more students. So I would also like to say that I'm sure there's some people that might have I'll call it increasing enrollment fatigue. Maybe they're tired of hearing about increasing enrollment. But the longer we kick the can down the road with enrollment, the longer we're going to keep talking about increasing enrollment. We haven't kept pace with enrollment, and until we catch up and keep pace with the positions, you're going to keep hearing about increasing enrollment impacting the budget. For example, the high school asked for 4 teachers this year, content area teachers. In the superintendent, all of which were appropriate asks. But in my budget, in order to keep things low, I only proposed one of those. That was an English teacher. With the board's increase, the additional funding that they adopted, we were able to add a social studies teacher. And I can tell you that delaying these things impacts both our students and the taxpayer. So it affects our students, and I asked the high school, and they estimate next year, without this social studies teacher, about 150 kids will be turned away from elective courses. And I say that it affects the taxpayer because every time we defer costs, we're just stacking them up. And we've been trying to really smooth out the impact of increasing enrollment. But if we keep delaying responding to it, it just means that in future budgets, you're going to see higher increases, which is why our increase ask this year is so much higher than last year.
Okay. Thank you. Something kind of a similar question. What's wrong if somebody wanted to compare your 8.16 increase against other neighboring towns?
Oh. Okay, I actually addressed that in my presentation. Let me see, it is slide, if people have their packets, and by the way, we have extra if anybody needs one. Slide 7, which this is posted on our website if anybody wants to see it, just addresses that very question because it is common. I mean, it does come up where people hear about an increase in another town and want to know why ours isn't similar. So I'm just going to read into the record my remarks that I've said before so that it may help people understand who haven't heard this before. So addressing the pitfalls of comparing our percentage increase in other towns is an important question. I'm glad that you asked it, Mayor Zimmerman. It was suggested at the joint budget meeting last year that South Windsor's percentage increase should align with Simsbury's, Avon's, and Glastonbury's. And I've said that this is a fundamentally flawed comparison because it ignores enrollment realities. Between 2015 and 2024, Simsbury decreased by 63 students, Avon decreased by 193 students, and Glastonbury decreased by 373 students, while South Windsor increased by 969 students. By any reasonable standard, our percentage increase should exceed theirs, simply to keep pace with enrollment. But there's more. You must also consider the base upon which these increases are calculated. Looking at the funding that would be needed to match the same per pupil spending in these towns, we would need to add $12.8 million to match Simsbury. To match Avon, we would need $12.6 million, and to match Glastonbury, $14.8 million. Without acknowledging this funding gap, these comparisons to other towns are invalid. And by the way, Ms. Tramerka calculated the FY26 data, and the gap, I am sorry to report, is widening. In this current budget, we would need to add $16 million to match Simsbury, over $15.5 million to match Avon, and $17 million to match Glastonbury. And those three towns were selected because a council member selected those three specifically for comparison. I understand that there's been some comparisons to West Hartford at recent meetings, and I'm happy to provide the same comparative analysis. Between 2015 and 2024, South Windsor grew by 969 students. During that same time period, West Hartford declined by 664 students. This is a compelling delta to consider, and it should indicate that our budget increase should be significantly higher, just based on enrollment. But like the other three towns, we must also consider the base upon which these increases are calculated. If we were to match the same per pupil spending as West Hartford this year, we would need to add $19.6 million to the current budget. So I share all that because it's tempting to open up the Hartford Courant and see someone proposing a 6.2 or a 3.4, and you really have to know their enrollment. You have to know what their per pupil spending is to begin with. There's a lot of information that you would need in order to make a thoughtful and a comparison that makes sense mathematically.
Okay. Would I be wrong in also, I mean, I look at the town proposed increase this year, and I'm just going to say it since I wasn't on the council. I think probably over the last X number of years, we probably underfunded the town. So I think it's probably not accurate to compare this year's town request to other towns because maybe the other towns got more money over the last number of years. I would say it's the same thing for the Board of Ed. If you don't know what those other towns have gotten over the last number of years, and you don't know how much federal money they got and how they used it, you're really comparing kind of apples and oranges. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's whenever you're comparing two percentages, if you don't know what is behind those percentages, it's hard to make those comparisons.
All right, I'm looking. I don't see anybody else, so I'm just going to, oh, I'm sorry.
Which one is it? Okay, thank you. Do we say our name here too, like we have to do for town council?
Good, Mr. King.
Thank you so much. So a couple of questions I had. One is, and unfortunately, I'm going off of the superintendent's proposed budget book because I had that first, so I just kind of went through that. But I'm sure, obviously, some of the numbers are the same. But based on your presentation that you gave to us on March 2nd, on page 8, is it 8? Hold on one second. Let me make sure I have the right page. Oh, so page 5, you said a year-end surplus is evidence of fiscal restraint, which is awesome. My question, and I'll admit I'm biased as my wife is a teacher in East Hartford, with this year-end surplus for the teachers in South Windsor, Are our teachers coming out of their pockets for anything? Because I know for a fact that we have the King household budget and we have the East Hartford school budget. And I'm sure that when I saw the printer show up at my house from Amazon, and I said, "What is this?" He said, "Well, we don't have enough at the school, or we can only print one day a week," and so on and so forth. So with this surplus, have we passed that on to our teachers so that they're not coming out of their pockets?
So I think it's two separate questions. And in fact, I see our teachers union president in the audience, so certainly I can follow up with him to see if he's got anecdotal information. I do think our teachers would say that they feel well-resourced. I meet with all of our, when we have a new hire, I meet them in October, November. So every new teacher that we hire, I have a one-on-one meeting with them, and I ask them, do you have the resources you need? So I do think we're doing well in South Windsor in terms of providing the resources to our teachers. That does not mean, however, that I'm suggesting that teachers aren't spending their own money. Some of them may be choosing to do that as well. And the surplus, really, the teachers, there's a formula for the supplies that we buy for our schools. And so the teachers create the needs, principals then create the needs, they send it to central office, and that's how we make sure we have the supplies we need at the school. A surplus would be generated generally, not so much by teachers and supplies, although a little, that could be, but it's generally generated by other things. And, for example, you may have some leaves that the substitute or the replacement is at a lower cost than the employee. And so those things will pile up over time. And really what I was trying to address in my remarks is that it is very common. It is very common to have the use it or lose it mentality. I mean, I've worked in districts like that. I'm sure we've all worked in places like that. And the idea is if you've been allotted a dollar amount, spend down that last dollar. And I was very candid when I said at the meeting, we can fix, if people are concerned about us having a surplus, that's easily fixed. We just tell our administrators, spend it all. And that does happen in many districts. I'm proud to say in South Windsor that we've created what I call a culture of fiscal restraint. And if they don't need that dollar, they return it to Chris, who then looks at the greater landscape to see where are the needs across the district. We're over in special education, for example. And so if it turns out that they were able to secure the textbooks that they thought were going to cost X, but they found a way to get them more inexpensively, then that savings might address the overage that we have in special ed. So, you know, I always see a surplus as evidence that people are not just spending it because they have it. You know, every year we get an appropriation from the town, and that is it. That's the dollar amount. And I would think that us having a surplus is far superior to us coming to the end of the year and coming back to the council and saying, we ran out of money. We need more money. So we've never had to do that, and I don't intend on ever having to do that. But there are lots of reasons why you would end up with a surplus, but they're easily wiped out if your mentality is spend it if you got it.
Anything to add, Mr.?
Mr. Stead, yeah.
Mr. Stead.
If I'm allowed to speak, sure.
Well, I don't know, she brought you up, so
Well,
I wouldn't have, yeah, I'm asking the question, you brought him up, I didn't even know, I just said, who's the guy in the red?
Probably not for today.
Okay, I'm just, okay.
Deputy Mayor Paterno.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Wow.
And thank you to the board chair and board members, the superintendent, the administrative staff, and the Board of Education for the time, effort, and care that went into developing this proposed budget. And my thanks to our teaching staff, professional staff, and paraprofessionals for making all these plans a reality for our students. I want to begin by emphasizing that we all share the same goal here tonight, providing the highest quality education possible for the students of South Windsor. Our schools are the cornerstone of this community, and that strength benefits everyone, including property values. So with that in mind, I'm not a Board of Ed person, so I don't really respond to what the DIRG says, but I make comparisons to surrounding towns. And we have residents who come to town council meetings and make comparisons to surrounding towns. So I thought I'd do a little checking. I want to give you just some quick numbers. In terms of budgets, Vernon has increased plus 7% over the last two budget cycles. Manchester between 7 and 8%. Windsor between 10 and 12%. South Windsor somewhere in that 8 to 9% range. East Hartford, modest increases for next year. At the same time, you look at those same towns, these are bordering towns, Vernon enrollment growth is 0.4%. Manchester, minus 1.4%. East Hartford, minus 6.7%. Windsor, plus 2.1%. And South Windsor, the strongest growth in the state, at approximately 22.4%. That paints a different picture for me, and when residents come and want to compare it to surrounding towns, look at those numbers. So our budgets are being driven, whether it's the town budget or Board of Education budget, by this idea that we've all had that attracts people to live in South Windsor, that the education system should be the best around. And students are proving that and families are proving they're coming here because of that education system. So the fact that we have that dramatic kind of enrollment increase is going to mean we've got to support that budget.
I'm going to go back to Councilor King.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. So I do want to say that I'm thankful. Before you even gave your presentation, I had some circles around special education, school safety, and new staffing for increasing enrollment, and I'm glad that those numbers went up. I do think that, especially these days more than ever, after COVID, special education is huge, and we need to put the resources, the finances where we need to put those, so I'm thankful for that. On page 4. No, not out of the superintendent's proposed budget. It's the same as your guys' budget. Page 4, where it talks about contractual salary and staff services increases. If you could break down, are all of these union numbers, the 3 million?
Are you asking if those represents all union employees?
Exactly, because the question I was going to ask is if it's not, can any of these contracts be renegotiated? If it's, I don't know the difference between the salary as opposed to the staff services.
So most of our employees are in some form of a union. All of our teachers are in a union. All of our paraprofessionals are in a union, and that
Paris, too.
And that includes school secretaries. The custodians have a union. The administrators have their own union. You're looking at pretty much the only people who aren't in a union.
Okay, okay.
And that's very, that's common in any school district. So those are negotiated contracts.
Okay. Thank you. Wasn't sure if they could be renegotiated. Someone else, if somebody else has a question, that's fine.
Deputy Mayor Paterna.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know if I were to ask you about what's driving the budget, special education would be in that category. So I guess the question is, are we looking at what the state, whatever grant funding opportunities are out there to support that large number in the budget?
Yes, there's lots of discussion in the state about both special education funding and, of course, ECS, which is the large grant that the town receives for education. So it's always interesting about the conversations that happen. I don't rely on anything until May 6th when the session ends. There is, in general, there is encouragement to districts to use seed money to create in-district programs. So there's a push to create those. And the reason for that is that in-district programs generally serve our kids better and our families better, and generally, they are less expensive, which is one of those rare times where it's a win-win, where the best thing is also less expensive. So there is a strong encouragement. Now, we've been doing that for a long time, so there's very little for us to do on that front. We have an in-district program at Eli Terry that serves quite a number of students. We have our 18 to 22-year-old program that you've heard a lot about, because that's the program that we're trying to find new space for. One, I guess, positive, if you could, that could be a positive financially, is if we are able to secure an appropriate location. They're currently housed actually in this building, and the rooms that they're in are not appropriate. They are not handicapped accessible. There's a whole host of reasons why it's not appropriate where they are, but that's where they are for now. We're looking for new space, and if we were to come up with, I know our programming is solid and would already market itself, but you also need to have the right space. We could potentially take in tuition students from other districts, which could offset the cost of finding another location. So while we're looking at other locations that will have a cost associated with it, in time, our hope is that we would be able to serve the students in surrounding communities that may be so small that they just can't, they don't have the economy of scale to run their own program. These are expensive programs. They require a lot of staff. And the continuum of needs of those students is pretty wide continuum. And we are mandated to educate these young adults from 18 to 22.
Thank you.
All right, while we wait for more lights, Dr. Carter, can you provide some details on how the Board of Ed has saved the town money by various initiatives in the past few years? Comes to mind closing an elementary school, changing the start times for some elementary schools to save on buses, privatizing our food service. And then the second half of that question, which is probably a little more difficult, given our need and desire to reduce spending, is there anything like this kind of yet to be done?
Well, you did a great job summarizing. Those were the items I would say, and you are right to guess that there's only so many big rocks that can really move things. For example, it would be very popular if we were to announce that we're going to go to one start time for elementary schools. Parents want it, staff wants it. It would be very popular. But in order to achieve that, we would need to add $2.1 million to this current budget. So it's just cost prohibitive. You mentioned food services. I think it was about 10 years ago, the cost of operating our food services program was $600,000 to our operating budget, which was a significant cost. But then we outsourced that and we partnered with Chartwell's, and that's been a great partnership. And so we no longer have to carry that 600. So over a 10-year period, we've saved the town $6 million by that partnership. And interestingly enough, and it's very counterintuitive, but during COVID, we actually increased revenue related to food services, and we wisely saved that money and collected it over a period of time. And it was very fortuitous that we did that because, as you know, we needed to expand the cafeteria at Timothy Edwards. Our growing population could no longer fit in the cafeteria, and we had the funds to expand the cafeteria without asking the South Windsor taxpayer to pay for it. We had the funds through the revenue that we were able to generate during COVID. Now, some of you may be hearing revenue and wondering, can that offset the budget? Any revenue that we find through food services has very narrow and specific uses. It cannot be used for other purposes in the budget. It has to relate to food services. And even within that, there are parameters.
Okay.
Can I make a comment? And then Liz.
Mr. Mackey.
I just want to say, because I think it's important, and I said this during our meeting, another thing that we save money on is, again, looking at the team that we have here. I think it's not something that we see in here. I think there's a lot of times people talk about the salaries that people make, and I know Councilor King brought up the salaries and the contracts, but I think one of the things our staff does here really well is hiring people that are motivated and want to work and do a really good job. Because if you hire people that aren't motivated and want to do a good job for our district, then people aren't working so good, and then the job's not getting done. So I think starting with Dr. Carter and her whole team and all our teachers, it really trickles down from our directors and everybody down who hire people that want to be in South Windsor, want to stay in South Windsor. And although that may not show up in this book that everybody's looking at, in the end, it makes a difference. I just think that was important, and I know she's not going to say it about herself, but Liz.
Can I follow up, though? I will say, just in terms of the topic of recruitment and retention, there is a dollars and cents to it. And if you have constant turnover, the training that you put in, I mean, we spend a lot of money, in part because it's mandated, training our staff. And when you invest that training in staff, and if you have a revolving door, that financially is not a solid situation to be in. So it's not just that we are proud of having a culture that people want to come to and want to work. You know, I mentioned those meetings I have with every teacher, and 201, I mean, I've been doing this every year for 16 years. I've met with every new teacher, and they are very clear. They often say, it wasn't that I was unhappy in my last district. I didn't know I could be this happy. And that is a tribute to our principals and our teachers, who are great teacher colleagues to one another. So having a supportive work environment is not just a nice thing to do, it is a financially smart thing to do.
Counselor King.
I see, Liz, because I have just a quick follow-up, but that's fine. Liz, I'll yield to you for yours.
Oh, thank you. Dr. Carter, thank you for being here and your staff here tonight to work with us on this. I have a question concerning last year's budget and the reduction in last year's budget, and how you said that we would be kicking the can down the road last year, and the reductions, how much of a negative impact did that have on this year's budget? Because every single year for budget time, we see the ups, we see the downs, and it's a continuum that happens as a cycle of every 2 years with whoever is elected and the majority party, and they want to stay and they want to get reelected, and so on and so forth. I mean, that insanity really has to stop. But with the reduction of last year, how much did it affect this year's budget negatively?
So I'm glad that you said it and not me, but I will concur that unfortunately, if any town, not just South Windsor, budgets on election cycles, you're really in trouble. Because you're just suppressing it in 1 year, letting it bounce back the next year, and that is what happened. I think I had shared previously that we had asked for a 597 last year, and had the 597 been fully funded, the ask that you see before you, I'll use the superintendent's at 791, would have been a 6.45. So the same ask we're making, you'd be looking at a 6.45% increase, because you'd be building off of a base that was more stable from last year, where we were really artificially suppressed. So you are correct that, artificially suppressing a budget in 1 year will only have it boomerang back the next, which is why you're seeing the number that you're seeing. And again, deferring costs that we know are not going away just stacks them up. And that's why you'll end up with spikes, because you did not, we try to present it so that we smooth it out. But, in our if it was 6.45, we would have been right in the ballpark with the town's ask this year, and you'd be looking at a different scenario. But you create fiscal cliffs when you artificially suppress a budget.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that for me, because I'm tired of seeing it. 16 years of seeing the ups and the downs and the suppression, and then everybody. We're only hurting our residents in our community by doing it that way, and all the taxpayers in our community, the businesses and everybody else, to try to meet the budget. We have to be wiser and smarter and stop being so selfish, I believe. And I'm speaking to everyone in the room, because next year is election year. And if we do things right this year, then next year's budget, we won't have to play games with it, so we can get elected, and we don't have to hurt the residents or every taxpayer within our community. And I'm just speaking for myself. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go back to Councilor King.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to be clear, the question that I had, and this, again, I'll reemphasize, my wife is a teacher, so I wasn't suggesting that we don't pay our teachers. I think they are our children spend 8, 9, 10 hours. I think they're not paid enough, personally. So I just want to be clear about that. My question was more about if we had staff that were not union, that if those contracts or whatever could be renegotiated. I would never want to touch a teacher's contract. If anything, I would love to be able to give them more. So just for clarity's sake for that. But moving on, page 15. My question is in regards to, there's a couple of spots, and you can see how I have it marked up here. In regards to every child experience, education, workforce development, I see we have a bunch of not applicable. Or did we just get rid of those programs from a revenue standpoint? Is that?
Typically, when you see an NA
Yep.
in a revenue page, it usually means that it's a grant that no longer is available.
Okay.
The funds are no longer available.
So that's how we lost, it looks like over $100,000, because that's just pure grant money.
Can you tell me more about where?
Right at the bottom where it says, total federal grant revenue, under anticipated, and then the projected is less than that?
Right, so I think the NAs in that section you were looking at were the ARP ESSER funds that expired. Is that the top of the?
Yeah, so I'm looking, and again, I could just be reading it, but I guess that's what this is for. So if all of these are grants, the paraeducator grant that was at one point for 10,000 and then anticipated was not applicable, the Perkins, is this all part of what we were getting from our state? Those different grants that the total at the bottom says 1,809, 264, but projected is now 1,673, 289?
Those are federal grants
Yeah.
in that section. Yes, and our federal grants do fluctuate from year to year. Some grants are no longer funded. Sometimes there's a formula. And so the formula changes from year to year. It might be based on the number of Title I students that you have. There's a variety of formulas that go into revenue, and there's some that retire. Is there one, Chris, that you want to talk about?
So in the, when you're looking at the federal grants at the very top, the coronavirus ARP ESSER, that 484,000, that's being added into that first column. So if you're looking at the
I see.
totals, so that, those would have expired because they were part of the pandemic. And so that's what's driving the value up in that column as opposed to the current column.
Thank you, okay. I just wanted to know, I guess, so for me, it was more, should we be going after more money from the state? Are we missing out? Not suggesting that you guys, because we have a senator and we also have a town representative. So are we missing out on going after money from the state?
Most of these are entitlement grants,
I
so
see.
based on a formula, so it's not a merit base, it's not how good your application was. There's a clear formula, and these are the funds that we receive.
So does it matter, if I could follow up, does it matter, say, for example, on page 22, where we have programs that are going down in amounts, and so on several pages, page 22, page 30, so on and so forth. So it's not as if we don't have a certain program I'm just trying to understand, do they say, okay, you don't need the money? So it's not that. So we're not cutting, and then they're saying you don't need. Okay. So the fact that, say, for example, on page 22, where we have, looks like $8,000 less, can you talk to me about that? Because it's on several different pages that we're losing money, and I just want to make sure we're cutting programs in your mind that we should not be.
So these pages aren't revenue, these are the cost of the program and the personnel associated with. So this page that we happen to be on is general education. So each page will have a title. It might be athletics, it might be health and phys ed. And so that's the program. The program is the non-personnel expensive, materials, things that you need, resources, and the personnel is the staffing associated with that area of the budget.
So while
And if you look on page 21, right next door to it, there are budget notes for every page that we have, and they will go through why something is either up or down in any kind of notable way. So the budget notes are always a good thing for counselors to note. When you look at the page with the numbers, then look to your left to the budget notes, and it should go through. We try to anticipate which lines might cause someone to ask a question, just because it's up or down, and there's always a reason why something is up or down.
Okay. Obviously, I need to reread it because I'm trying to understand why the program went down, but the personnel went up. So maybe so we don't need something, but we got more personnel? Oh, okay. Okay. Salary increases. Got it. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So, Mr. King, as an example, if we looked at athletics, maybe in a particular year, we didn't need uniforms. So the number of teams stayed the same, the number of athletes stayed somewhat the same, but we didn't buy uniforms, or we
Got it.
didn't buy something that maybe the next year, they'll need it.
Thank you. Cool.
Okay. Counselor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 3 questions, but I'm happy to spread them out if
Go
other
for it.
people. So there's been a lot of perseveration online about, and a lot of discussion about the increase between what you had proposed and what the board had proposed. So I was just wondering if you could kind of explain for people what the increase in the board's recommendation, like how you chose to spend that, what that money is going to go to and why, because you have a lot of things that are on the kind of the wish list that didn't get funded, so I'm just wondering why what you chose was chosen.
Sure. So you're correct to note that there is a slide here that lists a whole host of positions that never even made the superintendent's budget, let alone the Board of Ed's budget. So with that additional 250,000, as I mentioned earlier, the next greatest need at the high school is social studies. So there's money for a social studies teacher in that increase that wasn't in my proposed. And not because it wasn't needed, it's because out of the 4 teachers they asked for, I chose the neediest department to put in first. But getting social studies in next year would be great. As you heard, they estimate 150 kids are going to get turned away from courses. And then the other 2 positions are called behavior specialists. And we put those under safety at this point because, and this is not unique to South Windsor, this is happening across the state. I talk to my colleagues about this all the time, but unfortunately, schools are seeing a real surge in dysregulated behavior. Physically aggressive behavior that harms themselves or behavior that harms others. I don't want to sugarcoat it, it's pretty serious. And we've taken it very seriously, and so we are looking for folks that could help a dysregulated child not get to the point where they're throwing chairs in a classroom that could hurt other children or disrupting the learning for other children. And unfortunately, that is happening far more often than what people might think if they don't work in education. I see our teachers nodding. And this is happening, I think the biggest change is that this is happening at our very young grades. And so a behavior specialist is a non-certified position. And that's not the only reason to do it this way, but it is a less expensive solution. So, for example, the middle school principal wanted a school counselor in her budget. Perfectly reasonable request, based on their numbers. However, what I think was really the need is another person to help address these dysregulated behaviors that are disrupting the middle school, and it is happening. And so because we couldn't afford to put a counselor in there, and I also don't think that's the most efficient solution, we did put in a behavior specialist for TE to help with those behaviors, to have someone who can respond. to those behaviors. And these are people that are trained in de-escalation and PMT trained, and often, certified is a requirement to be a teacher in the Connecticut schools, but there are a lot of non-certified folks who are really great with kids, and sadly for them, they are not paid as much as teachers, and so that can be a less expensive solution, but you can end up with some really great people who really connect with kids and do a good job. We actually also, our safety officers kind of fall in that same category. We've been very fortunate that many of our safety officers are really good at de-escalation and make connections with the kids. So when you hear safety officer, yes, they are buzzing people in, yes, they are doing walks and checks on locks and doors, and they're doing all the things you would imagine when you hear a safety officer, but they're also keeping our schools safe by building relationships with kids. And the more adults we have in that category means the greater ratio of those types of adults to kids, which can reduce the explosive behavior. And it's quite concerning. I certainly talk with teachers all the time. If they were here, they would tell you how concerned they are about this behavior. And we are trying to be responsive. And so that's what's in the 250 that was added by the Board of Ed.
Thank you. So my next question is, despite having 4 years of math in this very building when I was in high school, I don't math and I don't finance. So just going back to Councilwoman Pendleton's question about like the decrease to what you had, the cut from last year and how that impacts this year. Can you just explain a little bit more about why that is? Like, I don't know if there's a way to put numbers to it or.
Sure, I'll take a general stab. Chris might do even better job than I will, but, one of the things that we did, so basically, and I've said in my earlier presentation that really our town leaders are at a point where you need to have just a true philosophical discussion about where we're headed in our schools. I don't want to use the word crisis, but I will say I think it's being underestimated, the trajectory that we're on. And that's because the pain can sometimes not be visible to parents and kids and folks. And so last year, I talked about there were two choices to address the $1.3 million cut. And there were the painless and invisible ones that I was very transparent and described as being fiscally irresponsible, and that was how I described them. And then I said there were those that would be educationally irresponsible, like eliminating our STEM program or music or sports. And so last year, the choice was made to try to protect programs. And I said last year, it's really what order you want to do it in. We could do the painless ones last year, but my point was, then the next year, if we're not funded appropriately, we are then doing the painless ones. And so we could have reversed the order. We could have started cutting programs last year, but we chose to rely on reserves, which I was very clear is from a financial standpoint is not recommended. I was very clear about that, but it beat the alternative to eliminating things like STEM and music and sports. So the problem with that is that when you rely on reserves are great in an emergency when something came up that you weren't expecting. But if you rely on reserves just to be your basic operating budget, you're creating cliffs. And when you don't have those reserves, you have to make up for them the next year. So for example, healthcare is a good example. It's actually down slightly from Chris's last report. Our healthcare reserve percentage was 20.68, and now it's 20.04, so it's down a little bit lower, which is not good. You want it to be higher. And so the goal is really to have 25% of expected claims. But because we relied on reserves last year, we now are having to make up for that this year. And I want to be careful because I do think there's a misunderstanding that when we say make up for the reserve, we're not restoring the reserve. We're keeping up with the claims. Last year, we relied on reserves to pay the claims. This year, we can't rely on reserves to pay the claims, so that's what creates the spike and the increase. But it is important that people understand that the budget that the board is proposing does not restore the reserves we relied on last year. In time, I hope that we can grow those reserves, because then they're available when, what I would call not a true rainy day, not a self-inflicted crisis, but a true rainy day, that if you have something happen in the community, or there's an acute need that couldn't be anticipated, when you have those reserves, you're able to use them to address that acute need. If you're using them just to do your general operating budget, you will quickly run out of money. I don't know.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And then my last question is, you know, you've been talking for several years, and the whole town's been talking about, you know, kind of the increasing enrollment, and, you know, that things have kind of crested in the elementary schools, and now we're into the middle schools, and, you know, we'll crest in the high school in 2034, 30, something like 33. But when you say it crests, like, you know, if you're thinking about a wave, you know, a wave crests and then it goes down. Are you, like, what is going to, now that things have crested in the elementary school, do you anticipate that the numbers will start to go down anytime soon, or, like, you know?
I wish I
level
could say
set on that.
yes, because it would give us a little more breathing room from a facility standpoint. If you look at our projections for K-5, they've stabilized, but they're just plateaued. So you don't start to see a real dip. And I would feel better if we could see that crest, which would give not only a little bit more financial breathing room in terms of staffing, because then as teachers retire at K-5, we wouldn't need to replace them, because we can operate with fewer K-5 teachers. But that's not what the projections show. And I'll just share this, because it's kind of, I don't know, maybe it's us just nerding out on education stats, but we track our kindergarten enrollment very closely. It's the one enrollment that our projections are usually pretty much on, you know, the grade, give or take. But K is always, you know, you just don't know. You don't know what kids are out there that we haven't met their families yet, or we don't know they're there. And what's got me concerned right now, because I am hoping to get a little bit of reprieve at K-5, and we may be right on target, but last year at this time, for K registration, we typically have about 50 to 60% of what will eventually be the whole cohort registered, about 50 to 60%. As of this moment, we're already at 97% at Eli Terry, 88% at OH, 71% at PRS, and 69% at PV. So now, maybe our parents have just finally realized we really need them to register early, and maybe, you know, it'll all settle out to be what we thought it would be. But it is an indicator that has me a little worried that we're already at very high percentages of what we thought we would have for K classes. Again, it may work out just fine. We may just have a lot of eager families who are ready to get their kids into kindergarten.
Thank you.
Dr. Carter, maybe a little bit of a follow-up. Can you talk about the fact that this isn't a business, and if those projections turn out that they're going to be higher, regardless of how many students show up, we have to provide space and education, regardless of what that means?
Yes, you know, public education budgets are really complex, and that's why you often hear me use the word nimble, that they need to be nimble, because there is no, sorry, we didn't budget for you. If kids come in, we have to find a space for them, and we have to educate them, and that includes children, that if you recall during the special education slide, can have huge impacts on districts. You know, our highest single outplacement right now is $425,000. So if that child moves in or out of a town, think of the swing that happens just by that one move. So Yes, we are not a business, we are not making widgets, and we can't just stop the production line. We need to continue to educate children, it is a mandate. And so you are correct that comparing us to a business would be flawed in the sense that we have less control about our expenditures than maybe a business does. It doesn't mean that we don't approach the finances of the district with a business sense in terms of really taking our responsibilities seriously with the funds. And Ms. Chamerka does an excellent job of watching every dollar. But as seriously as we take our oversight of these funds, it doesn't change the fact that we don't control when these expenses arrive at our door.
Okay. So without sharing anything inappropriate, can you please explain the important role played by the school resource officers provided by our police department in the town side of the budget? If I were still on the board, that would be the one thing that I would be talking about, but
Sure. So we'll start off with saying we have an excellent relationship with our police department, and certainly our SROs are extremely valuable members of our school communities. And I've been very open over the last several years that one of my aspirational goals would be to have a third SRO. And, I was really pleased to hear at the recent council meeting that the police department is at full strength. That's good news for our community. That's good news for our schools. Unfortunately, our schools are not at full strength. We aren't at the staffing levels we need to address the increasing enrollment, and we're not keeping pace with enrollment. So even though having a third SRO would be a very high priority for me, if the funds were available to the equivalent of an additional SRO, it would not be my priority currently with this budget. There's too many teachers and other staff members that we have to have for mandates that would have to come first, even if the town found the funds to do so. But, that would be ideal. But unfortunately, we are not at full strength. We certainly at the high school, we have a long way to go to get to full strength. And at the middle school, we're getting there. And at our elementary, classroom teachers, I would say, yes, that's an example where we are full strength. Keep in mind that there's more to elementary schools than just meeting the regular classroom needs. It's the intensity of needs that can shift costs at the K-5 schools. So you may not have your population numbers change, but you may have an increased need in an area that requires additional staffing. And whether that's interventionists, whether that's multilingual tutors, whatever the case may be. So the intensity of needs is a separate and distinct sort of driver of the budget than just the sheer numbers alone.
okay. And my last question, and I'll see if anybody else. I think the last 3 or 4 years when I was on the board, the increases were almost directly related to the increase in student population. Tell me if I'm wrong, this budget seems we still have that challenge, don't get me wrong, but we also have that challenge out in the community and out in the world that the cost of everything has gone up. So even if we weren't still the fastest growing school district in the state, just the fact that healthcare and utilities and everything else has gone up everywhere. I can't go, I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor Paterno, I can't go through a drive-in window without spending $20 for lunch. Well, obviously, that also affects everything that you do in the school system. So, I wrote down that, medical and dental went up 2.3 million, about 21%. I think part of that has to do with the reduction or the cut from last year and reserves, but I think the majority of that is that there's an estimate that the cost for medical is going up. Is there any chance that that'll change between now and like when we finish the budget? And if you could just use that as an example, because I think a lot of the increases in this budget are increases in costs.
Right. Yeah, for all our talk about increasing enrollment is barely touched in this budget. It's really to address special education and healthcare. And healthcare, this is another example of something that's not unique to South Windsor. My superintendent colleagues around the state, we are all commiserating, and healthcare costs are driving lots of school budgets up. And so their numbers would have been lower if it wasn't for their healthcare costs. And maybe they're able to absorb that a little bit better because they don't have the increasing enrollment problem that we have. So we're in less of a position to absorb it. If your question is, might we get better news? And there's been some years where, after we proposed a budget and before the council adopts, we've been able to raise our hand and say, good news, we could lower our healthcare line by a little bit. It's sadly, if there's new news, I think it's going to be worse news. I don't think it's going in the direction that we would want. The last 4 months of claims have exceeded the budget each of the 4 months. So we imagine that when the experts who do these projections, which, by the way, that is not something the board staff does. There are hired experts in healthcare that look at our trends and tell us where they think what percentage we should increase our budget for. Our guess is that it's certainly not going to go down, and after, these X number of months that haven't had a positive trend, it's possible they could come back and say your health, your health line should be higher.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Counselor Delnicki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question regarding to your budget that you proposed, and then the board's added 250. I just hope this question comes out the way I want it, is if these 3 positions were that important, why weren't they in your proposed original budget?
Great question, and if we looked at the slide of all of the positions that weren't in my budget, all of them are defensible. We're at the point now where we're just making choices between worse and worse. So they're very important, but so aren't the positions that were in the budget. But there are far more positions that didn't even make my budget, let alone the board's budget. They're very important. So to say that there's lots of important things that didn't make my budget, but I think I'm a realist, and I felt 791 was just as high a number as I could go. I know that's disappointing to some of our staff who are really advocating for some of these other positions. I think they understand the predicament that we're in, but I'm glad you asked, because please don't mistake that those 3 positions are just extra or would be good if we had it. Those are just part of a long list of positions that we need and will have to fund, but just didn't make the budget. The only difference is the behavior specialist for the middle school, and that was a solution to have a less costly position than the school counselor. I felt I couldn't include the school counselor, but I felt that there's such a need that we need to do something. And honestly, budgets are plans, right? They're a plan for where we think we're going to go. If we had an influx of students that were presenting, significant behaviors, we might have to shift priorities. We might have to find the funds for that behavior specialist and give up something that we need, but that becomes more acute. So yes, I'm glad you asked, because it's not an indication that it was not important. If you wanted the budget, that would be me sharing everything that I think is valid and needed. It would not be a number that could be supported by the council.
All right, is there anybody else? I keep looking for lights. Counselor Cordero.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dr. Carter, I've got a couple questions in regards to, by the way, thank you once again. I understand the difficulty and how a lot of residents are frustrated, right, at the increase. And we've spoken before in the past, and I understand, but sometimes, tough decisions have to be made. And I understand the board's position where we want to keep education where it is in town. I went to the school system here. I have 3 kids in the system. I completely understand. The only problem is like, at some point, families can't afford to live here. And a lot of them can't. A lot of them go to schools here. You want to say yes to education, increases by 8%, and there's families here, like, how much longer can we afford this? We want to live here, but we can't, right? So it's a double-edged sword. So I just looked through the budget, and I understand you folks and your staff made tremendous sacrifices in trying to find cuts where it wouldn't, affect the student's experience in the school system. Completely understand, like I said, we got 3 kids in it. I just got a couple questions, and when I went through the book, and one was on page 30, which is the education for mathematics. So I guess in here, for the high school, it was up like 26.47%. So I was just trying to find big numbers. I see a lot of decreases in elementary, and like through the whole book, it's very well detailed. But like, that was just one part. I was trying to find out, even in the high school and the description.
Yep. So that, just for the public, because they might not be seeing this, the 26.47%.
Right.
Represents $14,000 in increased instructional materials for the high school. So program is not personnel, it's materials. It could be textbooks, it could be consumables, it could be, things that they need in the classroom. So at the high school level, there was a need for more materials, and that is what's driving the 26.47. And then conversely, you see in that same, there was less of a need at the elementary, so they were
Right.
able to decrease by 10,000, and they were down by 34.98%.
All right, thank you. I had one more, bear with me here. On page 44, which is the special education. Just for the public and for me as well, to get kind of educated on this part here. For the board placement, there was an increase of 35.55%, which was like 1,061,000. What is the board placement?
So there are expenses that are called outplacements, where students are educated in a facility other than ours because their needs can't be met in district. And so board placement are outplacements that come out of PPTs that are binding. And then you see things like agency placement, and that might be an example of DCF requiring. DCF may get involved, and they may dictate that a student have a certain program that we would pay for. So as you can see, we're not anticipating agency placements. And then the $1 million is in outplacements. If you look on page 43, just so that you'll know where the information is, that bar graph shows that in this current year, there are 699 special education students, and 666 of them represent in-district, meaning we're educating those children with in-district programs. And then the darker number, which in this case is 33, represents that we have 33 students that are in outplacements. And those placements can range anywhere from $55,000 to $425,000.
Right, so what's the backing behind the increase? And I get it, because they went up by 3 from 2024 to 25 was 30, and then 33
Oh.
replaced.
Yes.
So the
thank-
increase from 2024 to 2025 for the following year, which is 25 to 26, increased by 3 students,
right.
outplacement.
So Chris just handed me a good note.
Okay.
Which, the $1 million, 500,000 of that is the fiscal cliff that I talked about when we use reserves. So in order to meet our needs this year, we relied in our budget, in the current budget, on $500,000 worth of reserves. There's not an infinite amount of reserves. And so this year, we need to plan and fund the full amount ourselves. So that's an example of where you're seeing a big increase, because we had to use reserves last year in response to the reduction that we had, the 1.3 million. So that's an example of that, sort of when you suppress it in one year, it comes up the next.
Okay. And to follow up with that, you move down the list there, the transition program, which had an increase of 45%, is that also because it was not funded the year before, or are you saying that that's just a general increase?
It's a combination of things, including that we are looking for new space, physical space, and leasing space for that program. One of the reasons we need to move the program is just in and of itself, they need better space. But also equally important is that that program takes up 2 classrooms in this building. And if that program moves out, that creates 2 more open classrooms. Right now, we are scrambling to create as many classrooms as we can in this building, in the main campus, to absorb the 350 more kids that are coming. So by moving that program out, we gain back 2 classrooms, which is extremely helpful. And if we were to try to, make back those 2 classrooms by adding 2 portables, very expensive, much more expensive than leasing space for this program. That's obviously not a full solution for our high school, but it's every classroom that we can create here, we are trying to do so.
Okay, which is now a follow-up to my next question would be, since you're kind of mentioning about lack of space and classrooms, that eventually we're going to be looking at a new facility.
Yeah,
So,
you
the projection from the middle school moving forward to the high school down the road, so as their taxes increase, for this year and next year, as we start looking forward, we always got to look down the road.
Right.
The 5-year projection, I mean, you must be concerned that these 2 buildings are insufficient.
Yes, I am concerned, and in terms of, I think I alluded to this maybe at the planning and zoning meeting, in terms of a new high school, I know there's rumors, are they building a new high school, are they not building? So right now, what we're investigating is whether or not the state could provide a much, much, much more robust school construction grant because of our enrollment. And I have gone to the state, and I have made the case that there's no other town that can show them our data, because oftentimes when they create special legislation for a town, they're worried about the slippery slope, that if you ask, then everyone else is going to ask. My argument is that no other town will be able to hand them the documents that I handed them to show our growth over time. So we're researching the ability to have significant state funding to address the high school facility. But it's very premature in knowing whether we would achieve that. It does happen. There are towns that get special legislation. It's not unheard of. And I would argue that there are towns that have achieved it with less rationale than we have. So I wouldn't want to say I'm optimistic, that might overstate it. But I do believe, I will say this, when I show people our data at the state, they take it very seriously. They see our situation. And I explain to them that the impact of our enrollment is not just on facilities. It's our operating budget, which is why we're having this hard conversation here around the 8.16. And it's also impacting our facilities. So we're being hit in 2 different ways. K-8, I feel we will be able to maintain. I don't think we'll need portables at TE. I'm saying that based on current information that we have. I believe we're going to plateau at the elementary, and so I think we'll be okay there. It'll be tight, don't get me wrong. And what will happen at TE that won't be popular is, by parents, kids, or teachers, is our class sizes are going to be going up. They already have, and they will continue to go up, which, is not ideal. But we think we can house it. The high school is just a whole different animal in terms of, so we're trying to think about ways of creating classrooms like this program, and we're looking at places where we can knock down walls and do different, we're trying to reimagine, which is what we did at TE. You may not know, but we added 4 classrooms at TE in hallways. The hallways were wide enough, and it would still meet code, that we could build classrooms inside these hallways, which unfortunately, we liked our big wide hallways. But, desperate times call for desperate measures. And the other thing that helped TE is that the preschool that was consuming a good number of space, which had been moved because Orchard Hill got the first surge, right? Elementary got the first surge, moved to Pleasant Valley, and that also opened up space at TE. So we're hopeful. And then, of course, there was the CAF expansion that we were able to pay for through federal dollars. I can tell you right now, I don't know if we'll be lucky enough to have enough state funding to build a new high school. That would be fabulous. But at a minimum, we already know our cafeteria is inadequate at the high school. Kids are eating in hallways now, and we have 350 more kids coming. So, yes, it is keeping me up at night, but that's not new. Facilities has been a very challenging situation for the last 10 years. Yeah.
So, and a side note, in regards to state funding, how much, just so the public is aware, how much money does the state of Connecticut give to South Windsor for education?
Do you mean for school construction or?
No, just for
Just
education.
like, just ECS. I don't have the exact, it's like 11 million, I think 11.4 million is our ECS funding.
And that's based on income, the median income? Is
Yeah.
it based on?
Yeah,
It's
so-
obviously not based on population of the schools.
The ECS formula is, I will not pretend to be able to explain in this
Right.
meeting without notes how the ECS formula works. But it does largely reflect wealth ranking, meaning the ability to pay. And the state believes that we have been overfunded, and I'm sure that is not how our residents hear it, but the state believes that we are overfunded. And so our wealth ranking, because our wealth ranking keeps, becoming a stronger part of that formula, it cancels out the benefit of increased number of students does help your ECS a little bit, but it gets wiped out by our wealth ranking.
Right, so we compare our education budgets to other towns like Manchester, East Hartford, or even Vernon, they get more funding from the state than we do.
They get significantly more funding
So
from
it's hard to
the-
compare budgets when they say they got an increased budget of 4% or 5%. That's with the funding they're getting from the state. You're
Right,
basing
and-
your budget on a lack of funding from the state.
Right, and
So-
the 11 million goes to the town, just so people are aware. So the 11 million isn't received by the schools, it goes to the town to help offset the cost of educating. I mean, that's obviously a fraction of the cost of what it costs for our programming. But the formula is being looked at right now in it's very actively being discussed. I was on a webinar today at noon about ECS funding, and they are recognizing that the base level of funding is inadequate for all towns, and that there's a base, and then things get either taken away or added to depending on other variables, which are very complicated. You mentioned other towns getting more ECS. Most of the towns that are surrounding South Windsor, contiguous to South Windsor, are alliance districts. And alliance districts are historically districts that have performed in the bottom 30 in the state. And that comes with significant funding if you qualify to be an alliance district because of your student performance. And so that's a whole nother host of funding that comes. I can think of a neighboring town, going back to Esther days, this is going way back, but, I think we got 1.7 maybe, let's just call it that, 1.7 million, and a neighboring town might have gotten 20 million.
Right.
So it really, the help that can come to a community can vary greatly. And people have their opinions about whether the formulas are working. But there are many people advocating to lift the tide for all boats, and to get a better base formula for every district, not just districts in need.
Right, because I wasn't sure because we have the highest enrollment rates of any town in the state, that ECS would evaluate our situation and would increase those funds, but that's not how it works. It doesn't happen overnight, it doesn't happen over a year. It's a formula they work on for years, and there's no way we can even ever increase that on our end.
Right, yes, and that's why, when I went to the state for help, I knew ECS was not going to, that's mean, that's a whole other thing. But I knew that school construction was one that they can be responsive to unique situations. And again, I don't want to get people's hopes up about that. You know, I've made the case, I gave all the talking points and all of the data, but I can't, I don't want people to think that that's definitely going to happen.
Right, no, understood. I just have one more quick question, and it's just on page 72. Now, the negotiations provisions, that's like a holding, which I understood when you gave the description on the left here. The negotiation provisions, they hold an account until negotiations are complete. Now, the amount for, as you see here, is up 145%. But is that not just a holding amount, or is that, does that stay there? Does that get spent? I'm just trying to get clarification on that.
Yes, Chris will tell you, it's my least favorite line in this budget, and I wish we did it differently. I've complained about it every year, but I get it. I understand how it works, but I understand why it's confusing to someone looking at it. So the way that this works, and I'll let Chris correct me if I don't have this accurately, but there is an anticipation of, we might know a union contract is coming up. We may, and we don't know the outcome. And so a certain amount of money will be set aside as part of negotiations. And it could be multiple contracts, it could be a lot of things. And then, once the contract is finalized and we know the exact number that say, I'll just use the paraprofessionals union. We know the exact number that the increase is going to be based on the settlement, then Chris transfers those funds to the budget where those positions actually sit, which is why you always see it zeroed out, because she zeroes out the account once she knows where to assign the funds. But, I mean, all kidding aside, they know that I complain about it just because I understand why it would be, hard to understand if you're just looking at it. But yes, it's a holding place that then gets redistributed in other parts of the budget. So it's accounted for in other places, but it's just not accounted for because we don't know the outcome of the settlements.
Right, but usually the teachers have the biggest chunk of the pie, right, the biggest contract, the
Yes.
biggest membership. So that's why I thought it was high, because that contract's been resolved and set in stone. So the future contracts you're looking at are smaller groups, aren't they not?
Yeah, SWES is a pretty big union. I mean,
Big
I
union
don't
still.
have a dollar figure to put on it, but that's a big union.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you. Not that I'm being critical of it. I understand it's funny, but it's difficult for a lot of families
I
just
know.
moving forward. And you have families that want to stay here, can't. And that's why I brought up the potential of the school down the road, because this is just one thing after another, because people say, oh, all right, we'll take a hit this year for a tax increase. But you're not, because you still got to start paying for the schools that we built. And now we have to look at possibly another high school. So, we all live in this town, so we understand people are frustrated. So I just want to make sure that people are aware, and that's why I asked those questions that I did. But the other thing is, and I understand your staff trying to find cuts and stuff like that, but in regards to programs they do field trips, or I know sports, they pay for their own each season. They pay a portion of that to play for high school sports. There's a certain fee that each student pays.
They pay a very small portion. So,
Right,
yeah.
so, in order for people to not feel the effect of, let's say the kids don't play sports, right? Is there a way you guys look at maybe increasing the sports fees, like the music department, all those kinds of different departments, when they take field trips, stuff like that, when not make the families pay for it, those kind of cuts that,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think outside the box. If you want to keep where things are, where can we save some money, or just, if it affects the student, let them be part of the problem paying for it, would be a trip,
Right.
sports.
Right. No, you're absolutely dead on, and we've actually already had these conversations. There is funding in this budget to support field trips, and should we be cut beyond the 791 at least, we would be looking to shift those costs to families. And that's still kind of a tax, right, on those families, but it's shifting it to the end user. So there's lots of ways to shift costs to the end user. So a senior citizen is less impacted because they're not an end user, they're not a
Right.
beneficiary of it, and we shift the cost to families. So we are looking at shifting the cost of field trips. We are looking at increasing pay for play. Again, it's a form of a tax to those families, but it does impact the people that are directly benefiting. Just like, Parks and Rec would have their user fees are not impacting seniors because they're the end users, like Fourth R, for example. So there's that is definitely a conversation that we've already been having, and we anticipate having to make that shift.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Maniscalco, can I ask you a question? I think Dr. Carter alluded to it, but I've been paying attention. I think it was in the paper yesterday that there's a discussion about for this year coming up with an additional $150 million for education that supposedly everybody's going to get a piece. Now, our piece won't be that big, and that I've already talked to one of our legislators that next year there's supposed to be the much bigger lift about changing education, the formula. But hypothetically, because the legislative session ends on the 6th of May, and we potentially could vote on the budget on the 4th, if the state legislature in their infinite wisdom found $100,000 or some number for South Windsor, is there any way we could take advantage of that? Or do I assume that that would go into the general fund and we'd have to transfer it for emergencies or something?
Right, so I think if the legislature found additional money for the town, for some purpose, it doesn't really matter whether it's education or some other purpose, they send on some type of grant that we were to use for some operational need. As a result, we wouldn't have to spend taxpayer funds that were collected through taxes. You would really have, you would have one choice, which is to collect those taxes, and then at the end of that year, whatever you have as surplus funds would then get swept into the general fund. So due to the timing, it really does kind of mess with a lot of stuff. I would say if you look at just ECS overall, the governor on a regular basis proposes $11.4 million. We budget in the budget actually this year it's 1.18. We're typically getting about 1.2 or 11.2, I'm sorry. And then it's important to note that about $500,000 of that gets shipped off to our magnet school, since we have a magnet school in our community as well. But if we did get that extra funding, we wouldn't be upset over it, but it would be challenging to help residents in this upcoming fiscal year.
All right. And I know we have the option to wait and do our budget on May 22nd, but just for the board's knowledge, I think in our budget guidelines, we added a guideline that both budgets should be done together. And I'm guessing, Dr. Carter, why don't you take the opportunity to tell us why May 4th is better than May 22nd, since you have to hire staff?
Right. The hiring season in most school districts starts to kick off around this time, February, March, and April. You could never hire all the staff that you need if you waited until May 22nd to start advertising, because you would be competing against other districts who are already picking up the best candidates. And as we sort of started the conversation tonight this way, there is a actual financial value in getting the best candidates. Paying someone a good salary who is not effective at their work is not a good financial outcome for the town. So for hiring, it cannot wait till that time, especially for a district that's growing. If you're a district that has declining enrollment, you might not be doing that much hiring. You may have retirements that you're not refilling. So it is problematic for us to wait that long to do the work that we need to do in order to have the staff that we need in place. I think last summer, hired 40 teachers. You can imagine the amount of time, the interviews, the mock lessons, the reference check. I mean, Rich is a very busy person over the summer, and so, and by the way, though, I know you're going to say it, I know, Mayor Zimmerman, 40 is not 40 additional teachers, 40 reflects replacing retirees or people who have resigned. It's not 40 additional. But that shows you the kind of volume a district like ours has in terms of staffing.
Councilor Delnicki.
Thank you. It's not technically that's our drop dead date, May 22nd. We also have a meeting on May 18th. But since the session ends on May 6th, we can also propose a special meeting on May 11th. So that way we can wait until the state finalizes at midnight. So,
Okay.
I mean, we can always add that special meeting, so.
All right, does anybody else have any questions tonight? Oh, Mrs. Corsi.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention, just because there has been a lot of discussion on ECS and state funding, Dr. Carter mentioned that she was on a webinar earlier today. I had decided to join that webinar just because I wanted to at least start to get a better understanding of how all of that works. It is extremely confusing. It's a lot, but there is a repeat of that webinar, I think next week, if anyone is interested in hearing exactly how confusing it all is. But it was interesting to get the updates on what is or may or could be happening in the legislature and how that affects towns. So if anyone wants to start diving into that, let me know. I'd be happy to forward that on.
All right, seeing no other lights, I'll just end with this, and then we'll go back to the agenda. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Councilor Pendleton, my fault.
Thank you. I'd just like to publicly state and say for the record that I think, and I know this council and this Board of Ed, thank the experts that figure out the budgets for our community. And Dr. Carter and your staff, and Chris, thank you so much for all that you guys do. You guys are the experts, not us. We are volunteers. We don't have this background. We don't get paid to do any of this work. And Mr. Maniscalco, you and your staff, and Ms. Perry, thank you so much for all the hard work that you guys do in doing the budget for the town government. And I don't think that you guys are acknowledged enough for your expertise in the fields that you do, in the way that you explain things to us, as you did tonight, Dr. Carter. It was amazing to listen to you once again. And I challenge anyone to sit down and dissect the budget and come up with some better way of figuring out things, because I think you two do a great job at your jobs. Thank you.
All right, so that's a perfect lead-in. I'll just say that, and I've said this pretty much since the last election, it's going to be a difficult few months. The council has some really difficult decisions. Any cuts anywhere, and quite honestly, everything needs to be on the table, because I don't think 697 is going to work with the public, my opinion. But it's not going to be, it's going to be based on tax rates. To Councilor Cordero's point, it's not going to be a comment on whether something's not needed. I really was happy with the questions today, because we didn't talk about $5,000 here and $5,000 there, because that's not really the issue. To Councilor Pendleton, the Board of Ed is the experts. The administration are the experts. I will commit that the council is committed to work together. And at the appropriate time, we'll certainly have some discussions, but it's not going to be an easy couple months. But I guess that's why people run for office. All right, without seeing any other lights, item 5 is executive session. We don't have one. Item 6, adjournment. Can I get a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Aye. All right, anybody opposed? All right, we are adjourned.